First of all, I'd like to greet everyone a very happy New Year. The Lord has indeed been very good to us in 2019, not only through the blessings that He has showered, but even in the trials, the testings that He allowed us to go through, which of course have strengthened our faith. And I pray for all of us that 2020 will be a time where not only will we be blessed by the Lord, but more importantly, we become blessings to others, especially as our theme for this year is to love others. Love others. Last December, we had to go to the Taft Avenue area, for an important appointment along Knockhill Street. We know that traffic during December is horrendous, right? And so I had to turn on Waze on my mobile phone and used it to navigate on our way to the destination we were going. Now, when I use Waze, I don't look that much on the screen. I listen to the instruction. And I'm very dependent on the verbal instructions. Like for example, Waze will tell me, in 300 meters, turn left, something like that. Currently, I'm using a female voice. And the reason why I chose this female voice was because this female voice would read out the straight lane. So that I don't make a wrong turn, I don't make a premature turn. So I would know, okay, turn right on this particular street or turn left. And so while on our way to Knockhill, we were instructed to make a right turn towards a street called Jesus Street. Okay? Jesus Street. That's the Spanish pronunciation, right? But because the female voice pronounced everything like an American, it turned out something like this. In 300 meters, turn right to Jesus. And when we heard this, we laughed. Okay, turn right to Jesus. And then when we were about to make the right turn, you know, when it reaches the 0 meter and it tells you to make the right turn, it again says, turn right to Jesus. And so we laughed again. And I even commented that this is a very good way to do evangelism. You get someone on your car and then you just pass through this particular area, turn on your Waze, and it will keep on saying, turn right to Jesus, turn right to Jesus. Okay. But kidding aside, I'd like to remind us again that as we start the new year, it's a time for us to realign ourselves to the person of our Lord Jesus, to His priorities, and to His will for our lives. I'm sure that last year there have been many hits and misses in our spiritual life, in our walk with God, or sometimes maybe there are more misses than hits. So for 2020, let's make it our priority that we want to be more faithful to Him, that we want to follow Him more fully than before. This morning, I'd like to share with you a message that God gave to the people of Judah as delivered by Jeremiah in the temple. And a moment ago, we read that passage. It's found in Jeremiah chapter 7. But a moment ago, we only read a short portion of Jeremiah 7, because Jeremiah 7 has more than 30 verses. Okay. Now, the message that you will read in this chapter is actually one of rebuke. A moment ago, you only read verses 1 to 7, and it simply says, turn away from your sins, or amend your ways. Okay? Make the right choice in life. However, if you read what follows from verses 8 onwards, you will see that the people of Judah actually missed more than hit what God was telling them to do. And so it's a message of rebuke when you read Jeremiah 7. But at the same time, as you read through the rebukes given by God, it's also a call to come back to the Lord. God was telling the people of Judah, come back to me. Or, another way of saying it, make the right turn instead of going the wrong way. Now, God had commanded Jeremiah to stand at the gate of the temple complex and to proclaim His message to the people of Judah. And according to some Bible commentators, the timing of of Jeremiah's proclamation in the temple area may have been during one of the 3 religious festivals, where the men of Judah were required to go to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast as well as to make appropriate sacrifices. Okay. So it could have been one of the 3 major religious feasts or festivals. So there would be a lot of people. And of course, although there were many people there, many worshippers, we have to take note that not all of them were sincere in their worship of God. And so Jeremiah stood at one of the gates where the people entered into the temple courts. And the message that Jeremiah delivered was a message of rebuke from God, as well as a call to repentance. But the sad thing was that the people were not interested in what Jeremiah was saying. In fact, they were ignoring God's word of warning. That was how the people responded to the message of Jeremiah. But what are the lessons that we can learn from this passage that can help us to take the right turn instead of heading down the wrong way? So I'd like to examine these lessons carefully, and let's see how we can apply each of these in our life, especially as we are looking forward to 2020 and beyond. Now, the first lesson that God wanted the people of Judah and for us to learn is this: we need to turn away from a false sense of security to full security in God alone. The people of Judah had this false idea or notion that as long as they have the temple of the Lord, they would be safe from their enemies. If you read verse 4, they have this false sense of security, right? Where they said, "This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord." And the threefold repeating of that phrase, the temple of the Lord, that was for emphasis. And what the people of Judah were emphasizing was that we have the temple, nothing will go wrong. We have the temple, nothing will go wrong. Maybe a modern equivalent would be like, we have this church building, okay, and as long as we come here every Sunday, then nothing will go wrong. It's something to that effect. However, God had to remind the people of Judah that this is a false notion. And He tells them of an incident that happened many, many years ago, not only to Judah, but to the whole of Israel. In Jeremiah chapter 7, verses 12 to 15, it talks about a place called Shiloh. Shiloh was described as the place where God first made His dwelling, meaning when the people of Israel finally entered into the promised land, they established the tabernacle, or they built up the tabernacle there in Shiloh, in the promised land. And it was kept there up to the days of the judges. And yet, we know that God judged the people of Israel even though the tabernacle was in Shiloh. Even when the symbol of His presence was there, God still judged the people. And if you remember the story of recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 4, the people of Israel went to war against the Philistines. They were losing badly, right? And then they thought, we will be victorious if we bring with us the Ark of the Covenant into the battle. But it turned out that they lost badly. Around 30,000 people were killed that day. The Ark was captured, and then the sons of Eli the priest, the 2 sons, they were killed. And so, what God was telling the people of Judah was that you have to let go of your false sense of security. Just because you think that you have the temple doesn't mean that you will be safe from harm, from the enemy. Look back to Shiloh. You had the ark. You had the tabernacle. And yet, you did not escape my judgment. Now, as Christians, we can have a false sense of security. it may be that some of us will trust these things more than we trust God. Like for example, the financial resources that we have under our names. If I have a few million or tens of millions of pesos in my bank account, I am safe. I don't need to be afraid of anything in life. Or if I have life insurance, I don't need to be scared, right? Or our capabilities and skills. When we can say to ourselves, I'm an expert, right? I'm an expert in this particular field. Or our intellect and educational degrees, right? The more letters that I put to my, after my name, the more secure I am. MA, MBA, PhD, PhD, or whatever title you want. Then of course our connections with influential people or those that we rub elbows with. So I know Mr. So-and-so, I know the president, I know this person or that person. So sometimes our sense of security are grounded on things like these. But sometimes we also ground our security on ungodly beliefs and practices. And we think that if we do these practices, we will be safe. Like, I'm sure that there are some Christians who still practice feng shui, right? Or some Christians who still believe that if you put the Chinese word for blessing upside down on your home, there will surely be blessing. Okay, as if it's all dependent on that piece of paper, the word hawk written on it. Okay. During the Christmas break, we had the opportunity to go to China. And of course, when you go on a tour package, there will always be the obligatory shopping time. And one of the stores we visited was the one that sold pearls and jade. Now, I listened intently to the presentation because there were some facts that were informative. Okay? I did not know that there was such a thing as soft jade and hard jade. Right? And our presumption was that jade, all the jade comes from China, but the truth is the best jade comes from Myanmar. Okay? So some of the things were informative. And so I listened intently until the point where the sales manager then said the following. He said that a jade bracelet can protect people from harm. And then she cited this one particular case where her grandmother had a fall but was uninjured. Okay? And the reason was because of the jade bracelet. Because when she fell, the jade bracelet broke the fall, supposedly. So what happened was that the bracelet was broken into pieces, but she was unharmed. And so the conclusion was that the bracelet had protected her grandmother. And that was the point where in my mind I began to say, really? Really? So that was the point where, everything that she said, was now thrown out of my mind because she had just thrown in a bunch of superstition into her sales talk. Okay. Now, all the things that I've mentioned, they will fail to give true lasting security. They cannot and will not protect us. In fact, many of the things that I've mentioned can be taken from us. Like, for example, the money that you have right now, tomorrow may be gone, right? You may have all the education in the world, but what if one day you start losing your memory? When you get Alzheimer's, and everything that you studied is thrown into the wind. So things like these, they can be taken from us. And so we need to turn away from this false sense of security in the things that we have or in ourselves, in others, or even in luck. We need to turn away from these. And instead, we have to affirm daily our need for God. We need to affirm daily our need for God. And so in our daily prayers, don't just ask God for the things you need, but also declare each day that you need Him more than anything else. There's this very nice worship song where it goes, I need you, oh I need you. Every day I need you. It's very similar to the hymn that we also sing, I need thee every hour. And so we need to declare that every day when we pray, Lord, I need you. And not only that, even in our daily decisions, we should not just operate on common sense. Yes, God has given us common sense. But we don't just operate on common sense and ignore God. But instead, we need to even ask God to guide us in the different details of our life. And so even if you have money, you have intellect, you have skills, you have connections, we have to admit and confess that all of these come from God. And God has given these things to us, not that we would become dependent on them and independent from God, no. But instead, God is telling us, I gave these to you, but you need to steward them properly, to use them wisely, and most importantly, is to acknowledge that it comes from me, and that you depend on me, not on these things. And so that's the first thing. We have to turn away from our false sense of security. Secondly, we need to turn from complacency to a healthy discontent in our walk with God. Let me read the quote written here. It says, complacency is the deadly enemy of spiritual progress. The contented soul is the stagnant soul. And this is from A.W. Tozer. Now, as a result of the false sense of security, the people of Judah now becomes complacent. So there's a connection between the two. If you have a false sense of security, the tendency is that you will become complacent. You will not have a sense of urgency to get things right with God. And so what happened was that the people of Judah continued on with their evil ways because they now were thinking, nothing will go wrong with me. Nothing bad will happen. I will not face the judgment or the wrath of God. And so because of that, I can continue to sin. I can continue to do wrong. And this led them to deepen their worship of false gods and to treat people badly. And then this complacency is also seen in their overemphasis of rituals to the neglect of genuine obedience to God and His law, which I will elaborate more on in a while. Now, when we become complacent in our walk with God, what happens is that we drift into the mindset that it's okay to sin, since God will forgive anyway. We think that because we are already believers of Jesus Christ, that we already trust Him, it doesn't matter anymore if we sin. It doesn't matter anymore if we don't pray, if we don't seek God's Word, if we don't treat people right. However, the passage is clear. We should not become complacent. In fact, we must instead have a healthy discontent in our walk with God. It means that we are seeking to grow. We are seeking to want to know God more. That we want to love Him more. That is what we mean when we say a healthy discontent. Let me ask you, do you know why some marriages don't work out? Very often marriages don't work out is because one or both parties take the relationship for granted. And they think that everything is okay with them. Okay. They think that we don't have any problems, we don't fight. Okay. So they think that everything is okay. So they begin to take the relationship for granted. What they don't know is that as they take the relationship for granted, they're already starving for affection and love. And usually that's when an affair takes place. That's when an affair takes place, when someone feels neglected. And so an affair doesn't just happen out of the blue, right? Adultery is not something that just happened at the spur of the moment. No. it usually happens because complacency crept into the marriage. Because we take each other for granted. And when we begin to take each other for granted, then we are starved for love and affection. And we begin to seek for that somewhere else. We must have a healthy discontent. It means we must not settle for where we are right now in our relationship with God. Instead, we must have a desire that our relationship with God would grow deeper. It would grow stronger. That is what we mean when we say healthy discontent. Paul in Philippians 3:10-14, he admitted that he had not yet obtained or had already been made perfect in verse 12. Then he says, I press on, I keep on. And then in verse 13 he says, he doesn't consider that he has already made it. Okay? But then instead he forgets what lies behind and he strains forward to the goal and he presses on. And so here is the Apostle Paul. He is, I'm sure a hero for many. And yet he could declare that I have not yet arrived. I have not yet become perfect. And so I press on. I strive on. I want to know Christ. I want to follow Him more intimately. If we compare ourselves with Paul in terms of spiritual maturity, I'm sure all of us would pale in comparison to him, right? We would pale in comparison. And yet here he was declaring, I am not content with where I am right now spiritually. I want to know Christ more. I want to follow Him more deeply. And so this 2020, let it be our goal, and maybe not just 2020, but even beyond. Let it be our goal that every year we want to grow in our relationship with God. And so what are some of the things that we can do for 2020? Maybe for some you haven't been doing your quiet time that regularly. So quiet time may be a hit or miss thing for you. Today I do it, tomorrow I forget. But what if we can do something as simple as committing to do our quiet time every day? It doesn't have to be a whole hour or even a half hour, but maybe for a start, can you commit 15 minutes of your day? At least 15 minutes. Can you do that? Or maybe you have never joined one of our prayer meetings even once. You can commit to join one of our prayer meetings this year. And we have many. You can look at the schedules. Or maybe you've never joined one of our prayer and fasting week. So we're going to have prayer and fasting on January 12 to 18. So why not make a commitment this year? You can commit to go on a fast during this week. Whether it's skipping just one meal per day, or skipping the use of your mobile phone or tablet for a few hours each day, so you can pray more, so you can read the Bible more. So those are just some suggestions. Maybe you can think of other things that can help you to grow, to have that healthy discontent in your spiritual life. So make that right turn this year. Develop that healthy discontent. Thirdly, we need to turn from partial and petty obedience to full obedience of God and His Word. Okay. Turn from partial and petty obedience to full obedience. God denounced Judah for its lack of obedience to Him. If you read the whole chapter, you would see that the people actually did obey some of the things that God mandated. But what they obeyed were the easier things to do, like, offer sacrifices. But they neglected to obey the rest of God's law. So they were willing to fulfill or to obey the parts that were easier to do, but not the parts that involve loving their neighbors, or the part where they're told, do away with idol worship. They refused to obey those, but they obeyed the parts that were easy. And so what happened was that they were obeying only that which was convenient. But they refused to obey that which would demand that they give up their sins. God commanded Judah in verse 23, obey my voice, obey my voice. But Judah responded by refusing to obey God and instead choosing to walk their own way and according to the evil of their hearts. And so because of their willful sinning, God deemed their sacrifices as worthless. If you read verse 20. In verse 21, God tells them, okay, your burnt sacrifices, you might as well eat them too. Now, if you understand how the burnt sacrifice is, a burnt sacrifice is supposed to be totally dedicated to God. But the fact that God tells them, you might as well eat your burnt sacrifice too, he was saying, I don't honor your sacrifice. I do not deem it as acceptable. Why? Because they did their sacrifices under the pretense of being, obedient, but they refused to obey the other laws of God. And so because of their willful sinning, God instructed Jeremiah, don't pray for these people anymore, because they are a hopeless bunch. Even if you keep on telling them my words, they refuse to obey. Now, if the people had chosen to obey God, if they had chosen to obey God completely, what would have happened? Everything would have gone well with them. But sadly, they refused to do so, even with God's prophets warning them continuously. Too often, we obey God only when it is convenient and easy. But when things get difficult, we begin to disobey, and then we choose to go our own way or the ways of the world. But we need to realize that the true path of blessing comes when we obey Him completely. Whether it is obeying Him in the good times or in the trying times. A moment ago, we sang the hymn, Trust and Obey, right? The refrain goes, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. A real happiness, or we could say joy, comes when we are willing to trust and obey. Not just in some, but in all of God's laws, God's commands. And so what are the situations in life that you are prone to compromise and disobey God? Is it a refusal or fear to stand up for what you believe in? When you are persuaded by your non-believing families to burn incense or to bow down before a departed family member. I think many Asian Christians are still facing that pressure, and very often they give in to the compromise. Is it the unwillingness to be honest because you will be dead last in business in terms of profitability? That's why before April 15 comes, what is April 15? Tax day. Okay? You will do whatever you can to cut down on your profit, okay, so that you don't need to pay more taxes. Or is it cutting corners in your work assignment so that you can make more money while rendering an inferior service? God's Word gives clear commands and principles as to how we are to conduct ourselves, to how we are to obey Him. And if we are aware of what the Bible teaches on certain issues, we have no excuse to ignore or disobey Him. Now, I'm not saying that ignorance is therefore good. That if I don't know the law of God, then it's okay. I can sin. No, that's not the point. Because remember this saying, there's this Latin saying which says, ignorantia legis neminem excusa. Ignorance of the law excuses no one. So even if you don't know God's commands, it's not an excuse. Therefore, it is our responsibility to become aware of what God commands us in His Word. That is why it's important we have to commit to reading and studying His Word and then applying it every day. Because when we do that, then we will turn away from partial and petty obedience to a full obedience of God and His Word. And so, that's the third thing we have to do. Turn away from partial and petty obedience and turn towards full obedience of God. And then finally, we need to turn away from hating our neighbor to loving our neighbor. Turn away from hating our neighbor to loving our neighbor. Now, the people of Judah had put all of their attention to the observance of the rituals, to the burning of sacrifices, things like that. What happened was that they neglected obedience to the commands concerning how they should treat other people. Look at verses 9 and 10. Here it says, "When you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, and go after other gods that you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered, only to go on doing all these abominations." I want you to take note of the first few words mentioned. Steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely. These first four are all sins against other people. When you commit these sins, what you are doing is you are hating your neighbor. And not only that, look at the next two. It says, make offering to Baals and go after other gods. Here, you can see that the people have violated both the commands of God. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbors as yourselves. And in fact, this hatred of neighbor would go to the extent where they would even burn their own children to the false gods. Read verses 30 and 31. And so, when you look at this verse, verses 9 and 10, you find that there is a correlation between loving God and loving others. They are spoken in one single sentence. And so if you truly love God, you should love your neighbors. When you love your neighbors, it shows that you genuinely love God, right? However, because the people have committed these sins, it shows that they neither love God nor their neighbors. And that would be the cause for their fall and for their exile. In the New Testament, the correlation between love for God and love for neighbor is emphasized in 1 John chapter 4, verse 20. It says, if anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And then if you were to read further on, it says, whoever loves God must also love his brother. So there's a correlation between loving God and loving others. Now you may say, I don't hate my neighbor. And it may be true that you don't do anything to harm them. But whenever you ignore them, whenever you don't lift a finger to help them with their problems, and you say to yourself, it's none of my business, in effect, you are actually hating them. Why? Because you are failing to proactively love them. I want you to consider the story of that Jesus told, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, the Levite and the priests were not as guilty as the robbers, right? Remember what the robbers did? They robbed this man and then they beat him up. So if you were talking about the degree of guilt, the robbers were much worse, right? However, the Levite and the priest, because they refused to show compassion to this poor man who had fallen prey, because they were passive, because they were indifferent, what happens was that they were hating this man. Okay? Because they refused to show compassion, because they were indifferent, they were hating this man. Whereas the Samaritan, when the Samaritan came, cared for this man, and even paid for his care, right? He left him at an inn and told the innkeeper, okay, here's some money, take care of this person, okay, and when I come back, if there's anything else that I owe you, I will pay you. This man showed compassion. Okay, so love has to be proactive. Love is not simply saying, I don't wish you ill, and then I don't do anything. So what are some practical ways by which we can show love to our neighbor? I hope that you can list down some practical ideas, because I'm sure that each person has a different take on how you can love your neighbor. Because we encounter different people, we live in different neighborhoods, in different communities. So the application may be different. But maybe to get our creative juice flowing, I want to show you a video. This is a short, around 2 to 3 minute video. It was produced by Covenant Evangelical Free Church. It was part of their campaign called Bless, their Bless campaign. So I'll show this video, so I'll have the audio turned on. So the title is Packed Lunch. Let me turn up the audio. Oh, this is so hungry.
Jason, how are you? Okay.
Hey, hi, Lisa. Hey, hi. So, you sure? Yeah, the usual. All right. Maybe sorry. Hey, next time then. All right. See you. Okay. Bye.
Wow, something special for you today. Wow, thanks. How much is it? It's okay, it's on me today. You make my day, man. Alright, ready for lunch.
Let me explain if you don't understand the video, okay? So what happened is that there's this employee who is so busy at work that he would request his employees to go to the hawker store and buy for him. So when you say take out, it's called tapaw. Okay? So he would ask one employee and then maybe another fellow employee to buy for him. But the other employees somehow don't want to do this for him. And so it falls on Jason, okay, who would do it. And then when he saw that others were unwilling, okay, he was the one who said, okay, I will do it. Okay. And not only would he do it for the minimum, just buy an ordinary lunch, but he even bought a more expensive lunch set and says, it's on me. Okay. And so that was his way of showing love for his neighbor, for his fellow So that's the story behind it. So anyway, to make a conclusion, just remember, make the right turn. Make the right turn. Let that be the aim of 2020 and beyond. And in what areas should we make a right turn? First of all, in terms of security. Find our security, our full security in God alone, not in the false notions of security. Second, have a healthy discontent with regards to our relationship with God. And then thirdly, obey the Lord fully, not just partially or selectively. Not only the parts that I like, but obey Him even in the parts that you know are difficult. And then fourthly, choose to proactively love your neighbor, to love our neighbors. And I want to end with a prayer. And in this prayer that I read from the website, crosswalk.com, I'd like for us to read it together and make it a prayer for us to start 2020. So let's read it together. We ask for your wisdom, for your strength and power to be constantly present within us. We pray you would make us strong and courageous for the road ahead. Give us ability beyond what we feel able. Let your gifts flow freely to us so that we would be honored by our lives and others would be drawn. And we pray this in Jesus' name.